Fiction, Heaven and Hell by E.A. Wallis Budge. Volume 3 is the contents of the books of the other world described and compared. So in 1905, these were printed in 3 volumes. Chapter 3, which will be part 4, is the reunion of the Beatified and the recognition of each other in the other world. Having now described Sekhet Hetep, the halls and gates of the other world, according to the book of the coming forth by day, Maharu. Well, Haru is sort of face, so it's not a... But it's the openness, right? So the day part makes sense. We may pass on to consider how far souls in the Sekhet Hetep and the power to know and recognize each other and to enjoy intercourse with relatives and friends, social communication, not, there's more than sexual intercourse for people who may not know. From many scenes and passages in text, it has for some time past been clear that husband met wife, and wife met husband again beyond the grave. For in the papyrus of Ani, we see Ani accompanied by his wife in the house of Osiris, Yasur, and in many other places in the papyrus of Yunhe, we say Yunhe bowing before 2 mummified forms which represent her father and mother, and seated in a boat side by side with her husband. From the papyrus of Nebseni, we know that the meeting of the deceased with his mother, father, and wife was believed to take place on the island of the first division of Sekhet Hetep called Kuntet, for he says... Oh, and before I say that, so page 59 and Book of the Dead, chapter 110, line 39, is for the papyrus of Nebseni, and the first note is the papyrus of Yunhe. O Kuntet, I have entered into thee, and I have seen the Yasur, and that I have gazed upon my mother and had union with my wife. Other passages in the Haru indicate that the Egyptian hoped to meet again other people besides his father, mother, and wife. People seeing their father as Osiris and their mother as Isis, and their child per se is Horus, maybe, but so the self-deification, the Sekhet Hetep. Thus, in the 52nd chapter, the deceased is made to say, "Let me have the power to manage my own fields in the Nadanu Mendes, and my own growing crops in the Yenu Heliopolis. Let me live upon bread made from white grain, and let my beer be made from red grain, and may my ancestors and my father and my mother be given unto me as guardians of my door, and for the orderings of my territory." This petition is repeated in chapter 189, lines 7 through 9, which was written with the object of preventing a man from being hungry and so being obliged to eat filth or offal. Offal would be like the pig feed, wouldn't it? Another passage, chapter 68, lines 13 and 14, from another passage, chapter 68, lines 13 and 14, it is clear that the deceased expected to find in the other world slaves or domestic servants who would help him to cultivate the land, which he believed would be allotted to him, and there is reason for supposing that such beings would have been known to him upon earth. He says, I have gained the mastery over the waters, I have gained the mastery over the canal, I have gained the mastery over the river, I have gained the mastery over the furrows, I have gained the mastery over the men who work for me, I have gained the mastery of the women who work for me in Netterkurt, I have gained the mastery over the things which are decreed to me on earth in Netterkurt. Thus we see that every pious Egyptian hoped to live again with the members of his household after death in Sekhet Hetep. And so there's a passage that seen that a man who died before his wife is expected to find another woman in Sekhet Hetep who he might marry. And so we have Mayur Yasyur Yup Na Ratta Ast Nahup Ucha? Is that how you pronounce the penis? The Ucha? Well, the ejaculating penis. Kind of an awkward thing to find in sacred text, but now the word which I have rendered ancestors in the extract giving above is abtu. It's abtu-e, and the plural would be u at the end, or abut, and its form and evident meaning suggests that a comparison with the common Semitic word for fathers, the determinatives, the man seated going like this, and the woman seated, prove that the word describes people of both sexes. It occurs twice in Haru, B's chapter 52, line 6, and chapters 189, line 9, and was translated persons by me, by E. Wallis Budge, in 1896. The oldest example of the use of the word was published by M.P. Lacau in Recueil, 1904, page 67. Excuse me for my mispronunciation of the French. There needs to be a French woman that teaches me French, right? The very short form of the prayer of the deceased, that he may enjoy the companionship of his father and mother in Sekhet Hetep, is the outcome of a belief which is very ancient and finds its fullest expression in an important chapter, which M. Lacau has published according to the text on the two coffins of the 11th dynasty, which were found at Al-Barsha and are now in the Egyptian Museum at Cairo. And that he described it as people will be found in chapters of Coming Forth by Day, text page 124 and 493. This chapter supplies us with some valuable information concerning the reunion and recognition of relatives and friends in Sekhet Hetep, and M. Lacau's excellent edition of the text is a useful contribution to the literature which specifically concerns Sekhet Hetep. The words which stand at the head of the chapter read, "The gathering together of the ancestors of a band to him in Neter Kur," and the text begins, but let's see, Neter Kur, or Neter Kur, is, or Neter Kur, maybe, is the name of the underworld, museum at Cairo. They bear the numbers 28,083 and 28,087, and Recueil, okay, McLeod has published Recueil 1904, page 67 through 72, and La Réunion de la Famille by M. L. Baylet in Journal Asiatique. Xeme Série, tome 4, page 307, where a rendering of the chapters into French will be found. So, Hail Ra, Hail Tem, Hail Some, hail not, grant ye unto Spe, that he may traverse the heavens, or sky, that he may traverse the earth, that he may traverse the waters, that he may meet his ancestors, and may meet his father, may meet his mother, may meet his grown-up sons and daughters, and his brethren and his sisters, may meet his friends, both male and female, may meet those who have been as parents to him and as kinsfolk, and those who have worked for him upon earth, both male and female, and may he meet the concubine whom he loved and knew. And concubine is not that it's an illegitimate spouse or anything. It's definitely just, I guess the lesser wife. But we see here the idea that, what was I thinking? There's implication about the pre-adolescent children who die, the innocence of them, or maybe they have to be reborn, and according to this mythology. But anyways, let's continue. Behold, of Kamar, the great creator, makes a pair to rejoin his grown-up sons and daughters and his concubines whom his heart desire, whom it is his heart's desire, and make thou spare to rejoin his friends, both male and female, and those who have worked for him upon earth. And if it happen that his father should be turned aside, or opposed, or removed, when he would appear to him, or his mother when she would reveal herself to him, and when Spare wishes to rejoin his ancestors, and his father, and his mother, and his men and his women, and if it happen that there should be turned aside or opposed or done away with the reunion of Spare with his little children, or his reunion with his brethren and sisters, and with his friends, and with his foster parents, and with his kinsfolk, and with those who have worked for him upon earth. And verily the heart which is provided with words of power shall be removed from Ra, and the choice oxen for sacrifice shall be driven away from the altars of the entities, and the bread cake shall not be shattered, and the white bread cake shall not be broken in pieces, and the meat offering shall not be cut up in the divine chamber of sacrifice, and for you rope shall not be coiled, and for you boat shall not be manned. And if he shall be with his father when he appeareth, and if he shall receive his mother when she maketh herself visible, and if he shall be rejoined with his ancestors, and to his fathers and his mothers, and his men and his women, and his little children, and his beloved ones, and his foster parents, and his kinsfolk, and his sons and his daughters, and his concubines whom it is his heart's desire to meet, and his friends, and those who have worked for him upon earth, and if he shall rejoin all his ancestors in heaven and on earth, and in the Netter, and in the sky, and in the Yakab, a region of the sky, and in Hap, the Nile, and in Yakab, the watery abyss of the sky, and in Hatrkau, and in Dadu, and in Dadet, and in Power, and in Ahakr, and in Abdu. Then verily the bread cake shall be shattered, and the white bread cake shall be broken in pieces, and verily the meat offerings shall be cut up in the divine chamber of sacrifice. In the divine chamber of sacrifice, and verily rope shall be coiled, and verily boat shall be manned, and verily the boat of Ra shall journey on in its way, being powered by the mariners of the Yakamusku and the Yakamurchu. Now his name is unknown, the demon is Hathor, surrounded by Sve, with the magical protector of life, but it is Sem who equippeth him. The sister of Spare and wife is the guardian of the wood of the great field, and moreover the sister of Spare, the guardian of the wood of the great field, saith, Verily thou shalt come with rejoicing, and thy heart shall be glad, and there shall be food to spare, and winds shall be given to thee. Yea, thy ancestors have commanded this. Therefore shall Spare come with gladness, and his heart shall be glad, and his ancestors shall be given unto him, and the great ones of the ancestors of Spare shall come with the joy, and their hearts shall be glad when they meet him, and they shall bear in their hands their staves. Their staves and their mattocks and their tools for ploughing and their metal weapons of the earth, and shall deliver him from the things which the demoness doeth, and from the actions of Newt, and from the things which the two lion entity doeth to every soul and to every entity. The ancestors of Spare shall make him to be delivered. Some sort of rubric is present. May be rejoined ancestors and father and mother and foster parents and kinsfolk and young children and wives and the concubines and beloved ones, male and female and servants and the property of every kind which belongeth to a man, to him in the Netter, the underworld. The Berlin Papyrus reminds us, as well as mainstream religion, right, that these relationships in our life, maybe they weren't actually for us, and I guess maybe we'll be replaced with something better where that isn't the case. But the children are the perfect ones that, meet us in the paradise of the other world if we go there. Artist Seb, who is the funeral chest or sarcophagus. Note 1 is connected to Seb, who equippeth him. Art Seb, who is the funeral chest, or the sarcophagus, or the illusion being to the fact that it was the body of Seb, the earth, and the deceased that was, laid down. 2, the meaning of the line, the great field, is not clear. The word chet is often applied to wheat or barley as the wood or the plant of life, but kset is also a term that's used for the body. My own note, by the way. By the great field, I understand sakket hetep, because in the afterlife, your deeds establish your field. The rubric ends with the words, the rope of Maat, the truth, millions of times, which indicate the whole chapter, probably including the rubric, was said by the person who wished to rejoin his friends in the underworld regularly and unceasingly for millions of times. Shu Tupnut. There's also the praise Hafaniao. The Hafani, is it Hafaniao or I don't remember which H. But he praises 100,000 times basically. The praises Shes, Maat, Heh, and Sep occur very often in the Theban recension of the Book of the Dead, and the full list of the passages will be found in the vocabulary to my edition of that work, page 328. And, well, I guess my edition of this work is audio work. But remember, in my recent interview, which I guess I'll have to edit to have better quality clips and maybe throw in what I probably said in the edited version, or versions, right? Because I'm not going to do the whole thing at once because it's pretty big. At least probably not. The ha, ia ha. The tetragrammaton is linked to terms for tahote or krahote, thoth, and ha, ia, the provincial, the cyclical, ha, the linear, eternal. A pursual of the above chapter shows that, Yahweh, the tetragrammaton of the northern Semites, the Jews and the later Christians picked up this in their faith, but it didn't start with them. Moses wasn't a Jew. Judaism is a much later thing. 540 BCE, if you're going to talk about Judaism as something you can look at as a conceptual thing, they come back, the Mobeds from Persia, they encounter that and they kind of have a new... But Judaism by name first appears in the second book of Maccabees. But anyways, a pursual of the above chapter shows that it's expression of beliefs and ideas concerning the future life which belong to a very early period of civilization and to a time when the Egyptians held most primitive views about their entities. The first paragraph calls on the two forms of the sun entity, Yuf, I presume, and the god and the demon of the earth and the demon of the sky, to allow the deceased to pass through the sky, and the earth and the waters to meet his ancestors, mother, father, wives, women of pleasure, sons and daughters of all ages, brothers and sisters, foster parents, perhaps uncles and aunts, cousins, connections, both friends and sexes, and the doers of things, both men and women, etc. And remember the unclean animal sacrifice offered to the sky demons by the shaman to get past the different realms, the sky and the earth and that sort of thing. Well, not all forms of shamanism are like this. Certainly in the Siberian form of shamanism, they offered dog sacrifices, and that's where we get our word shaman for religious specialists. So, portions of the second paragraph are difficult. I'm not saying the Egyptians all did this. There was a variety of beliefs and practices in Egypt. Portions of the second paragraph are difficult to render exactly, but it seems that in the deceased it is made to say that the event of his being prevented from meeting or rejoining his father, mother, and other near and dear relatives and friends, the customary funeral offerings shall be promptly discontinued, and the heart of Ra, which is equipped with its word, shall be removed from him. If, on the other hand, he is made to rejoin all his near and dear relatives and connections, and is allowed and enabled to travel about and visit them in the various holy cities in heaven, bread and meat offerings shall be duly made on earth for the entities, and the boat of Ra, compare it to Chemosh of the Sumerians, shall travel on its way. Chemosh, Kamish, Kamosh, various derivations later from the Mesopotamian into the northern Semitic. And the boat of Ra shall travel on its way. In other words, the deceased undertakes to provide offerings to the entities whom he mentions, so long as he is allowed to rejoin his relatives at will. Some people think of yoga as a system, as a conditional sort of thing. A lot of people, their worship is very conditional. But if he is hindered in any way, he threatens that the progress of Ra himself shall be hindered, and that the god shall suffer the loss of his heart with its word of power. Now, certainly egregors rely on us, but real gods and even the spirits that may falsely claim to be gods, they're going to have their respite regardless of what we do. So, the cow demoness Hathor is said to endue him with the protection of her magical power, and the earth demoness Seb to supply him with all he needs, and as guardians of the staff promises that he shall be supplied with food and air in the great field, because the ancestors of the deceased who are already living there have given orders to this effect. Now, notice that I'm describing some of these terms in the phrase of, well, what would pagan Satanism be? Not necessarily that to understand these, one has to indulge in that sort of thing, but that is the language being used as if it's in that context. But these same my rewording. These same ancestors, it is declared, shall come out to meet him, and it is possible that some attempt may be made to stop or injure him by Seb, Nut, Shu, and Tupnut, and they shall bring their sticks and staves and clubs and other weapons in their hands, so that they may be ready to defend their relative and lead him to their abode. Here we have a good description of the manner in which the Egyptian peasants have always turned out to defend a friend, and how they have always armed themselves with clubs and sticks and handles of plows or flails, whenever a fellow villager had to be rescued from the clutches of foes or from the authorities, and have gone forth to his assistance. Not only would their spirits defend their spirit relative in the other world, but they would also defend him by exactly the same means which their bodies would have employed to defend his body upon earth. So, the idea of crystallization of the afterlife, or the enhancement of the afterlife in terms of, via this life, or in terms of this life, but perfected, not limited in the material sense way. From one end of the chapter and the other, there is no mention of Yesir, who in later times became the god of the resurrection. Well, usurper. not really a god. And it is quite clear that the deceased believed that his reunion with his ancestors and family could be brought about with the help of any entity simply by the recital of the chapter millions of times with never-ending regularity. The repetition of the whole chapter was unnecessary, for if a man recited the words of the rubric an infinite number of times, we'd not only be able to rejoin his relatives, but also to regain in the other world possession of all the property of every kind which he had enjoyed on this earth. The rubric had, in fact, so far back as 2600 BCE, became a traditional magical formula of a most powerful character, and it must have been composed at the time when the abode of the blessed was supposed to resemble the great field, in which the men of a village assembled to celebrate a festival before the ideas concerning Sekhet Yaru and Sekhet Hatep, with which we are familiar from the book of Coming Forth by Day, were evolved. The texts of the chapter and rubric are of such interest that copies of them are printed as an appendix to the present section. We have now before us all the principal facts which are necessary for forming an opinion as to the kind of heaven which the primitive Egyptians hoped and expected to enjoy, and the means which he took to obtain admission therein. Now, it turns out, whether by claim to hide things, the Mithric faith, well, actually they were mimicking Christianity and it came later, and no, it turns out that's not true at all. It goes back thousands of years before Christianity. Christmas was celebrated a few thousand years before Christianity, at least in its own way, and Easter celebrated 4200 BCE. And we find that some text, it turns out, they even say, hey, there was an oral tradition, we didn't want to write this down, but we feel it's necessary now. So there's the degrading, and then there's common sources of things. So when exactly some traditions start, it's not necessarily on the oldest text, and sometimes a newer text is more authentic than a newer text as far as the purity of the source of the thing, particularly when you have a new revelation from an entity that is involved there. He either bought or persuaded or forced the servant of the entity or priest to give him words of power, i.e. names of entities and magic formula which he learned or had written down for him, and he relied for admission into the next world upon his knowledge of these, or copies of them, which were buried with him, and upon recitals of them at proper times and seasons by his relatives, friends, and upon the offerings made on earth by the entities on his behalf. One of the things that's considered by some even more blasphemous than demonolatry, the worship of the devils, whether they call it worship or not, taking them as deities, functionaries of worship, intercessors, such and such, is doing such with the loyal host of angels, which is of a different matter. Clay beings, things incarnate in physical bodies, or who were at some point the fire beings, which were here before us, or existed before us, they have choice too. But the light beings, the unfallen loyal host, the beyond gender sort of individuals, it's even more blasphemous to say that we can get them to do our will rather than them receiving the command and, or being directed towards us as, do what this thing wants, is that, or even to the point of people taking themselves as gods and trying to boss around the angels and the rest of creation. It's definitely considered more, are people thinking, I'm a higher god than the god itself? That's growing to be more and more popular movement. That's why I have a three-pronged approach. We have the New Age religion, we have Satanism, and we have Islam, or really the three categories of world spirituality that are rising the fastest in any way. Percentage-wise, Satanism is probably rising quicker than any of any major group. But anyways, once in the abode of the blessed, he was free to go where he pleased, to travel from one sacred place to another, to visit his friends, to eat, to drink, and enjoy the society of his wives and women of pleasure, and to rejoice in a family life which was only a glorified duplicate of that which he had known on earth. The entities he knew there were much like himself, and the extent and fervor of the worship which he devoted to them was exactly in proportion to the assistance which they rendered to him. His chief anxiety was not to forget the words of power which he had learned. His occupation consisted in watching the growth of crops, for all the necessary work was performed by beings who carried out on his behest. Now we pass on to describe the abode of the blessed according to the book Yimduat, the books of the gates, and Appendix Chapter 3, the chapter which will be part 5 of this, the chapter of the gathering together of a man's ancestors to him in the Nutcracker. And I guess we'll look at the characters before we go on and try to find out what's going on here. But as much as the next world is the crystallization of this world, this life, deep down, we're going to know. We're going to know if we've purified our intention, our action, our experience, and directed it towards these things, and if we really deserve these. We can assert it all we want, but at the end of things, we're going to know. Sharma, peace be upon you.